King Lear is my go-to book for community teaching and spiritual renewal. For me, it is Shakespeare's greatest contribution to wisdom literature, especially the existential books of the Hebrew Bible, including the Prophets, Lamentations, and the Book of Job. So I was really excited to learn about this new book by Richard Ashby, King Lear After Auschwitz. Richard's book is the first full-length study dedicated to tracking the afterlives of King Lear in post-war British drama. That is, in original plays that take flight from Shakespeare to explore the devastations of genocide, of capitalism, and of climate change. So I am really happy to have Richard Ashby here today to talk to us.
Hi, Julia. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Here is the book. This front cover, actually, this is a sketch by an Austrian artist, Oskar Kokoschka, who he was deemed degenerate by the Nazis and fled Austria, and then was invited to produce some line drawings of Shakespeare. And this is his Edgar.
And Edgar is such a hero in your book. So
yes, he is. Yeah,
that's really wonderful. Thank you so much. So, Richard, how did you get interested in this topic?
It started life as my PhD thesis. And when I set out on my PhD research, what I wanted to do was look at as adaptations, appropriations of Shakespeare in post-war and contemporary British playwriting. Playwrights are really using King Lear to interrogate the catastrophes of modern times, and particularly the Holocaust, which kind of comes to emblematize modern catastrophe. So in lots of the plays that I'm looking at, there'll be images that obviously recall the Holocaust and the concentration camps. As I was doing this research as well, it became obvious that it was quite a timely topic. I think with the global rise of the far right, anti-Semitism, I think on the rise again as well, anti-Semitic conspiracy theory certainly on the rise, climate change, as you mentioned, and we're entering this kind of period of late capital as well. So it felt quite an opportune moment, I think, to look at these playwrights.
Oh, it's really interesting. What do you think it is about King Lear that makes it so ripe for these kinds of appropriations? How did King Lear become the central Shakespeare play for our times, at least for serious theater?
The second chapter of my book is very simply entitled "Why King Lear," where I kind of think about some of these issues. I think it's probably fair to say that King Lear's the most kind of catastrophic, disaster-ridden play that Shakespeare wrote. You know, that it really is a vision of kind of the disasters of the world and dark and deadly devastation. And in that sense, I think it does speak to some of these catastrophes that have afflicted us in the 20th century and into the 21st as well. Shakespeare seems very preoccupied with what happens to human beings, what happens to people in periods and places of catastrophic upheaval. And as you say, Edgar's kind of the hero in many ways of the book. And I think he's really important to that, particularly in his transformation into poor Tom. You know, that he knots his hair and grimes his face with filth, and provides really an image of abject human degradation, really. And that's certainly how Lear receives him in The Storm. In fact, Primo Levi, I think, uses this moment in If This Is a Man in his own reflections on his internment in Auschwitz. I think if this is a man sounds to me like is man no more than this. And I think the playwrights that I'm interested in are kind of doing something similar. These kind of images of destruction and degradation, I think, offer them a way of portraying the events of the Holocaust and other catastrophic events in modern history. Can you have any freedom? Can you have autonomy? Can you express yourself in these moments of crisis and catastrophe? And I think that really preoccupies them. I think they're very interested in how do you produce new forms of tragic freedom after the Holocaust. And I think King Lear's a play that kind of probes those questions of freedom and human expression in times of disaster.
So your book begins and ends with Dennis Kelly's The Gods Weep. And that drama includes a storm of ash falling from the sky, which you argue is a reference to Schindler's List and a clear evocation of Holocaust. Can you tell us just a little bit more about why this play is so important to the story that you're trying to tell here?
Yeah, so as you say, it's a really powerful image from that play. To the Gods Weep, yes, is Dennis Kelly's King Lear play that I look at in the book, and not unlike a lot of other adaptations and reworkings of King Lear, it sets the action of King Lear in a transnational global corporation, and Lear is transformed into a figure called Colm, who's the chairman of that corporation. And he, like Lear, and very disastrously, decides to split the corporation between his subordinates. And what starts as a play that's kind of about corporate boardroom infighting and backstabbing, in Act 1, in Act 2, suddenly turns into a full-scale war between these rival figures. And it becomes apparent over the action and over the course of this war that war crimes and atrocities are clearly taking place. And as you say, I think the key image from the play is the moment when Coleman, he's like Lear, he's out in the wilderness in this kind of anti-pastoral, blasted world, where what he takes to be snow starts falling from the sky, and he catches somebody's hand and rubs it and discovers that really it's ash. And it becomes very apparent that the ash is coming from burnt human remains. And I do think that's a reference to a very similar scene in Schindler's List. What Kelly is doing is kind of drawing parallels between the Holocaust and contemporary fears about climate change. That, the degradation of human beings and the degradation of the natural world are perhaps things that kind of go hand in hand to a certain extent. And that's something that's been of a lot of interest to historians recently, actually, as well. And Timothy Snyder, in his book Black Earth, is interested in unpacking some of the relationships between contemporary climate change and capitalist exploitation of the environment and the Holocaust. Part of the rationale for the Holocaust for the Nazis was that, there was a competition between races over resources. And to a certain extent, if climate change does impact the ability of the earth to grow enough food and to produce enough resources, who's going to suffer? What kind of injustices do we see in climate change?
Oh, that's really fascinating. You have some pages in the book about the theater company Forced Entertainment, including their tabletop Shakespeare, in which they reenact all the plays of Shakespeare using these household objects, many of them in states of disuse or disrepair. And you write that this project, quote, attempts to produce not passive spectators, but moral witnesses. I've been watching the pandemic version of Tabletop Shakespeare. It's called Tabletop Shakespeare at Home, and apparently it's been viewed by thousands and thousands of people. How are these and other theater makers responding to our current catastrophe?
Tim Etchells is the artistic director of Forced Entertainment. And when I spoke to him, he said that project actually started all the way back in 1999 with a version of King Lear that they called 5-Day Lear, which was a performance of the play that was out, they put on after a 5-day workshop on the text. And it happened at the end of a period of NATO bombing in the Kosovan War. So again, it's this project is something that has kind of a genesis in a period of crisis and catastrophe, in a period of the pandemic, that it's almost as if, what do you do with theatre when there aren't any people anymore? If you're by yourself, how do you make theatre? What does Shakespeare look like in a pandemic? And perhaps this is it. This is now how we do Shakespeare. I've got my water bottle here, but maybe this is Lear for Shakespeare for the foreseeable future.
Well, you're doing such interesting work on Shakespeare and war and coming at it from these wonderful dramatic and theatrical and historical points of view. So it's really exciting. It was great having you here today. And I look forward to checking in with you in a year and find out what you're working on then.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Julia. I really appreciate it.